What's going on, guys? Neil Orpheus here, and I'm going to show you how I'll be setting up Fantasy Cruncher for tonight's single game slate between the Cowboys and the Giants for FanDuel. I should note, if you watched my DraftKings video that I just made, I mentioned that Michael Gallup may be making his season debut. And then, of course, right after that video ended, I checked my notifications and I see that Michael Gallup is not likely to play tonight, and neither is Dalton Schultz. So that's a little nice, fun wrinkle for tonight's game. But I'll start and show you how I am going to use Fantasy Cruncher. As always, I start by adjusting my columns so that I have the view that I like. You can save it here as a quick view in this little columns drop down. You can save as a quick view. And now I can kind of see everything that I want to see: ownership projections, my exposure caps, how much I'm actually getting of a player after I run a crunch, my projection, et cetera, in the middle of my screen. And then I go in, and most of the work I do here is in the advanced options, and I'll do most of my work in the general tab. Actually, all of my work in either the general tab or the groups tab. I'll start with the general tab. One unique player per lineup. I leave it as the default. Max salary. I don't put anything in the minimum field. I do put a salary cap that is lower than 60,000 on my lineups because I want to be a little bit unique. When I win, I don't want to be duplicated 200 times. I'd rather be duplicated not at all, or just a handful of times, so that I have bigger wins in the event that I do get very lucky. Which, everybody, you don't win unless you get very lucky. So if I get lucky enough to win a tournament, I want my payout to be large, so I leave a little bit of salary on the table. And on FanDuel, you're dealing with increments of $500, so I'm going to leave, just say, 1,500 on the table. So now none of my lineups are going to use more than 58,500 in salary. There are other ways to get unique as well. You don't need to leave this much salary on the table. It's just one of the easier ways to get a little bit different than the field, is leave a little bit of salary on the table. Another way would be, for example, using a player who not a lot of people are going to use in the MVP spot. A lot of people are going to be playing the same guys in the MVP spot, the highest projected players. And those guys are the most likely to be the highest scoring player on the slate, but you can get a little bit different that way. And if you do that, you might not need to leave so much salary on the table. But for the sake of this video and for the sake of my lineups, I typically am leaving some salary on the table. Offensive player versus defense. I'm going to set this at the max 4 players. So theoretically, I could have 4 players from one team and just the defense on the other team. Again, doesn't happen often in my lineups, but it is a way to get a little bit different. Not many people go on that full onslaught with 0 offensive players from one of the teams. Global exposure cap, I'm going to leave this at 100% so I can get 100% of any player. Randomness, I've already turned this on. I'm going to set this at 50%. Just a matter of how much control you want over your lineups. The lower your randomness, the more control you have over what Fantasy Cruncher gives you. Minimum projection to be included in calculation, I'm going to leave this at 3. So the only players who make it into my player pool are going to have projections of 3 or better. I might see players in my in the pool that have projections lower than 3, and I want them in my lineup. I'm just going to give them a tiny little boost to their projection to make sure they get into my lineups, make sure that their projection is above 3 fantasy points. Players from each team max, I leave this at 4. That means I could potentially have a 4-to-1 onslaught in some lineups, and that is something that I think the field doesn't do enough. And so I like to make sure that I have that possibility in my lineups. That'll do it for the general tab. Then I'll go to the groups tab, and I'll show you some groups I like to create. Hey guys, let me take a break here to tell you that you can get access to all of our Stochastic Plus NFL tools for showdown and single game slates for only $1. Click the link in the description of this video below, or use promo code PRIMETIME, all caps PRIMETIME, at checkout to get 1 week of our NFL Primetime package for only $1. This includes full access to all the premium content and tools for NFL DFS that we have to offer for showdown and single game slates, including player projections, ownership projections, top plays, lineup builder, and our expert Discord. This offer is only valid through September 29th. Please note that Fantasy Cruncher is an add-on and is not included with this promo. And the first one will be Daniel Jones in the MVP spot as my key player. So this is for just lineups that have Daniel Jones in the MVP spot. And what I'll do is I'll go and add I'll add all of the Giants pass catchers to the secondary group. And for these teams, Obviously, I'm going to include tight ends, but I'm also going to include the running backs. Saquon, I think, is pretty important to have in this group because he could easily score a couple receiving touchdowns, and you'll want him to be in your Daniel Jones stacks in the event that that happens. Okay, good enough. So that is all of Daniel Jones's pass catchers. I'm going to leave this at if any key player is used, then use at least one player from this group. So what that means is if you have Daniel Jones in the MVP spot, he's the only key player, then I have at least one player from this secondary group in the lineup in the flex spot. You could change it to two. You could just say only apply plus minus adjustments, and then it won't require having one of these players. It'll only make the adjustments that you put in these fields. A lot of different ways to play it. I think I'm going to leave it at use at least one, and then I'm still going to give some boost here so that it makes it more likely if I have Daniel Jones in the MVP spot, it's more likely that I'm going to get multiple of his receivers as well. And this is not a science. I put in a number to start. I see if I'm getting, the amount that I like in my lineups, in my Daniel Jones MVP lineups, and I might adjust these numbers later up or down based on how much I want of them in my lineups. Not even going to give a boost here to Breda or Brightwell. I don't think it's absolutely necessary to have them in too many Daniel Jones MVP lineups. Saquon, I think, scores enough fantasy points through the air that I will give him a little bit of a boost. But that'll do it for this group. And then a new group. I'll do a Cooper Rush MVP. And it'll be the same thing except for Cooper Rush and the Cowboys receivers instead of Daniel Jones and the Giants receivers. Cooper Rush MVP as my key player. And then I'll go through, add everybody with a projection. And you see, I just added Michael Gallup. I tend to be overly broad in how many players I include in these groups. It doesn't hurt to have players in there that aren't going to end up with projections. They'll just if they have a zero projection, they're not making it into my lineup anyway. So I'll include some players because I don't think it's necessarily 100% true at this point that we're not going to have Dalton Schultz or Michael Gallup. There's at least some possibility, and I don't want to have to go add them in later because again, if they have a zero projection, I don't have to worry about them in my lineup anyway. Add the running backs here as well. Both Pollard and Zeke are capable receivers, could put up points through the air. Okay, I'm good with that. And again, Cooper Rush, not a huge rusher, so I will require that if he's in the MVP spot, at least one of his pass catchers makes it into the flex spot. You could consider doing two. He doesn't do much on the ground, at least so far in his NFL career. I'm just going to leave it at one and give some boosts here. Okay. I wonder if some of these backup tight ends might look interesting with Dalton Schultz out. Jake Ferguson. Looks like they've already priced him up a little bit higher than I would have expected, but still will be interesting. All right, good enough. I think those are the only groups that I'm going to be setting today for FanDuel. You could set a group. I did this in my DraftKings tutorial. I did a group where I said if I have any of the pass catchers from the Giants in my MVP spot, then at most one other pass catcher from that group in the flex spot is an example of something you could do. I don't typically set that many different groups, but those are ways to increase the positive correlation in your lineups if that's something that you want to do. And you see, I did not make a group saying that if I have a quarterback in the flex spot, I have at least one of their pass catchers in the group. I typically don't with quarterbacks, but it is something that you could consider doing, particularly with Cooper Rush, who does not run much at all. The reason I don't on FanDuel, and I do typically make that group on DraftKings, but I don't make it on FanDuel because the skill players don't get as much of a boost relative to the quarterback anytime on a pass play because it's not full PPR. So, the quarterback is a little bit more likely to make it in there as the only player from his team if he spreads the ball around and, just runs a little bit, doesn't need to put up a whole ton of points to make it into the optimal as the only player. So here's an example. I did not require with Cooper Rush in the flex spot at least one Dallas receiver in the lineup with him. That is something you could definitely think about doing because he has not run much historically. But so far, I do not have that. And so I leave open the possibility of having a Giants onslaught with just Cooper Rush on the other side of it. Maybe he gets a 1 yard dive in to the end zone for a touchdown, something like that. I wouldn't want to have a lot of lineups that look like that. If I saw too many in my lineup set, I would probably go back and adjust that. But currently, I'm not seeing a ton of lineups that just have Cooper Rush from the Cowboys. So I'm okay with leaving it like it is. And then once I, take a look at my lineup, see if they're looking approximately how I want them to look, I'll go through my player set and I'll just go position by position. Okay, so I did not set an exposure cap on my MVP spot, and I'm getting currently 45% Daniel Jones MVP, 31% Saquon Barkley. Not using a lot of these lower projected guys in the MVP spot, which makes sense because there's no salary multiplier on FanDuel. You're typically going to get the highest projected plays in the MVP spot. And you just have to think, are you okay with that? Are you okay with just having most of your lineups be just these three players? I probably don't want it to be that condensed on this slate. There are some slates where I totally would, if it was a like Lamar Jackson slate, sometimes I'm totally okay with that. But I think that I'm going to set an exposure cap here. Let's get a little bit more spread out in the MVP spot. You could even do something, say, like, I want 100% Zeke in the MVP spot and lock him in. That's not something that I often do. I don't typically lock players in, but that's something you could consider. He's just not getting much ownership in the MVP spot. And sometimes with these running backs, they get points. Other players on their team don't get points for a rushing touchdown. So a lot of different ways to approach this. I'm just going to set the cap at 20%. And then I'll look at my quarterbacks. I'm currently getting 37% Daniel Jones, 19% Cooper Rush. I'll leave it at that for now. I might want a little bit more. Running backs, not currently. So Matt Breida currently has below a 3 fantasy point projection, so he cannot make it into my player pool as it is now. I'll just give him a boost to 3. Gary Brightwell, same thing. Rico Dowdle. I don't know that I want Gary Brightwell or Rico Dowdle. I at least want Matt Breida, so I'll just give him the boost for now. But those are guys that you can consider. Michael Gallup, as I said, probably not actually going to be playing tonight. So ultimately, I'll probably be changing his projection to 0 anyway. Not getting much CD Lamb at all. I don't think that I want to get just 6% CD Lamb. I think he's one of the highest upside plays on the slate. And I think I'm just getting none of him as a function of the salary cap that I set and his salary being pretty high. But I would like to get so now with the salary cap lineups that have CD Lamb, I'm probably going to have some ugly plays in there. It's going to be guys like David Sills, Kenny Golladay, maybe Simi. These guys will have to make it into some of those lineups. I'm okay with that though because in general, it's a good way to get different to have some of these lower projected plays. And I'm not going to have a ton of any of them. I'm just going to have them sprinkled throughout my lineups. But I think more likely, most lineups that have CD Lamb. So part of the reason I like it is more lineups that have CD Lamb because of his price tag are going to be using the full salary cap. So if you don't have the salary cap and you have CD Lamb in your lineup, you're likely to be running into a lineup that's duplicated several times. And that's something that I am trying to avoid when making my lineups. And this is, I'll crunch several times, so I'm not showing you exactly what my projections are going to end up being. This is just kind of as a way to start. I just want to make sure that these players at least have a possibility of making it into my lineup set. Tight end looks like with Dalton Schultz out, Jake Ferguson is probably going to be the TE1 for the Cowboys. He currently couldn't even make it into my lineup set. Obviously, I'm going to want to have him in some lineups as the TE1. Daniel Bellinger, also not currently in my lineup set. fair amount of kickers. And, because I've given every other player boosts, like as you've seen as I've gone through these tabs, I've been giving players little projection boosts. I will naturally get less of these kickers if I don't do anything to their projections, because relative to the other players in my lineup set, their projections have gone down. So if I want to continue getting 24% Graham Gano, maybe I need to give him a tiny boost. Brett Maher, same thing. And I'm not saying that I necessarily want to get this much. That's going to be something that is going to be slate dependent, but just showing you that you do need to be cognizant of all of the changes that you're making. And then defenses, I'm getting a good amount of these defenses. I'm going to get a little bit less based on the changes that I've made. I'm okay getting a little bit less than that. All right, so this lineup right here is an example. So I have Daniel Jones in the MVP spot. He only has one pass catcher, and it is Saquon Barkley. You have to think, am I okay with that? Should I change that group? Should I say at least two when I have Daniel Jones in the MVP spot? I think I'd probably be okay with this lineup as it is. Top lineup, Saquon Barkley in the MVP spot. This assumes Saquon Barkley is going to be getting a lot of the production for the Giants. And then the Cowboys are going to be putting up a lot of points on the other side of it. I think these lineups look fine. They're probably not going to be duplicated a ton. Here's an interesting one. So we've got, I don't love this lineup, Cooper Rush in the flex spot, Tony Pollard in the MVP spot. So this could work out probably in a low scoring game where, Cooper Rush throws a touchdown to Tony Pollard, obviously preferably 2 touchdowns to Tony Pollard, but that's pretty unlikely. So this is probably a low scoring game where Cooper Rush throws just 1 touchdown to Tony Pollard. Pollard outscores Cooper Rush for that play. Not a lot of scoring elsewhere, so the defenses both do well. And then Daniel Jones in the flex spot as the only other Giant there. It's tough. Do I really want that? Daniel Jones can run a little bit, so he could potentially put up some fantasy points on his own without bringing any receivers along. But it's just a matter of, that's something you need to be thinking about as you're making your lineups. I will go through and I will crunch several times, making a lot of changes to me, sometimes in the projections or giving thumbs up, thumbs downs, but then sometimes also going back into those groups and giving bigger or smaller boosts based on just the way my lineups are looking from a construction standpoint. Anyway, that's about as much as I do when I'm setting up my fantasy cruncher for FanDuel. Hope you have some success tonight doing something similar. Good luck.